followed by Kevin Gould, who's a geographer and teaches at Concordia University with me in Montreal. And as well, he's a member of Independent Jewish Voices.
So, yeah, the title of my talk is Everyday Palestine. So, begin with something that I think probably you know, that the image of Palestinians, the figure of Palestinians is a kind of battleground. There are not many groups that are stereotyped so relentlessly as Palestinians, and especially in the news media. And these stereotypes portray Palestinians quite narrowly, often negatively. And the common stereotypes you know are often the refugee, the victim, the terrorist, maybe the revolutionary occasionally. We often see men and youth, especially in kind of violent situations, in these portrayals. And if we ever see a place where Palestinians live, it's a very rough place, a refugee camp or a bombed neighborhood. And it's not that there are not bombed neighborhoods or refugee camps in Palestine. Of course there are. But what I want to say is that these stereotypes narrow down the possibilities for imagining Palestine and Palestinians, especially for people that are not Palestinians. So disrupting these stereotypes is one of the things that needs to happen to kind of widen spaces for Palestinian life. Maybe it's not the first thing or the most important thing, but it's part of the process, I would say. And there are so many ways maybe that this can happen, but one way is to think about everyday Palestinian life, to think about other kinds of everyday life than the kind of caricatures or the kind of stereotypes that circulate in the media, right? I'm going to try to tell a story about, I guess it's everyday Palestine. It's more like a kind of everyday encounter that I had when I was in Palestine. And it's not like the authentic, the real Palestine. I couldn't possibly tell you what that is. I was in Palestine for 2 weeks. I wouldn't know, right? But it was an encounter. And it's a story about Palestine that's a little bit that's told maybe in a different register. So I want to tell you the story, and then think a little bit about some implications of that story, right? And you already kind of get a sense of what I'm getting at. And really the story is about, mostly it's about a home, and about a kind of hospitality that I received when I stayed in the home of a good friend when I was visiting Bethlehem. So, this is actually the house where I stayed, and in the house lives a woman whose name is Claude and her husband Joseph. They have 4 children, and the woman has lived at home since the children were small, and helping them, like going to school and taking care of them, and also taking care of her husband, is my guess. 2 of the children are now grown and out of the home, and other 2, one works for an NGO and the other works for a business. One was recently married. And Joseph himself works as a tour guide and also a barber when there isn't that much tourism. The husband's father, Isa, and mother live there as well. And even though you have this kind of stereotype of the very, very humble home, it's a pretty a really big and beautiful home that's made possible by the work of these different generations, but also from relatives overseas. And you can kind of see this really pretty garden that's below the house. I was kind of doing funny things with my camera. This house is also surrounded by apartment buildings. It's quite urban, but you wouldn't notice in the picture. So this is just a view of the garden. And also you can kind of see the neighborhood, the apartment buildings. They're pretty similar to the kinds of apartment buildings that Kanishka and Stefan showed slides of. So let's see. We had a quick bite to eat upstairs, just some snack and a drink of water. And then Joseph brought me around the house and to this kind of corridor that came to a kind of basement suite, if that makes sense. Like down these little stairs beside the garden and then to a little door. And he gave me the key to the entrance, and that's where I stayed that night. And I'm going to show you that room. So here's the room. It turns out to be an actual like studio apartment, and there was a washing machine and a little kitchen, along with a TV and a sofa and a washroom. And I kind of dropped off my stuff on the bed, and I started to snap some pictures of the room. And the reason that I did that actually was, I wouldn't normally probably have done it, but the daughter wanted to make the suite into an Airbnb suite so that we could draw people who might like graduate students, or there are kind of religious tourists that come to Bethlehem, and they could stay monthly in this suite. And in some way, the whole presentation is related to this Airbnb idea. My pictures are a lot of like of the house rather than of the family. I didn't know I would do this presentation. So then, but I did take a picture of at least one person. This is Isa in the garden, who's the father of Joseph and the grandfather of the girl or young woman that was setting up the Airbnb project. And I accompanied him while he had some chickens that he was raising, and we picked also the earliest figs, which were still very sweet. And above the branches where we are is a large oak tree, which was planted to remind him of his sister living in the United States. There was actually 2 oak trees for two sisters. And he told me a little bit about his story. In 1948, after the Nakba, he traveled to nearby country. I mean, he was, I don't know, I didn't learn from him that much, but I know that he traveled, he had to leave. He traveled to nearby countries. He eventually emigrated to Brazil. And when he was in Brazil, he met a woman actually from Bethlehem. And after 10 years in Brazil, they moved back to Bethlehem, where they settled. And that piece of the story is important because in Brazil, he learned Portuguese, and he also learned Spanish somewhere along the way, maybe with the tourists in Bethlehem or maybe there. And since I am a Latin Americanist, I was able to communicate with him. So there was a bit more exchange than there might have been. And actually, he's holding a habanero pepper, which is I guess I didn't really know if that's like widespread in Palestine or not, but it's certainly widespread in Latin America, and I wondered if you got a taste for it at that time. So this is my like funny picture. So you can see the shirt has made it back from Palestine along with its occupant. So I wasn't always behind the camera. This is a picture taken by Joseph, who took me to the Church of the Nativity, where he brought many, many tourists. And I said, oh, this was such a great, it was so interesting. And he's like, yeah, the tourists, they all really liked it. And he also brought us to the apartheid wall, which is in itself, like as horrific as it is also a kind of tourist attraction. And it's very close to other tourist attractions in Bethlehem. So it becomes a part of the circuit as well as a kind of very dangerous site. Okay. Then this is downtown Bethlehem, and very close, I guess, to the Church of the Nativity, where he and his father probably brought hundreds, maybe thousands of tourists over the years. Okay, how much time do I have?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, we're good. This is so funny, I think. I guess a lot of you go to conferences, but this is such like conference culture. Like, you have 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And like, I really believe in this, I'll say, because people sometimes take a really long time. But anyway, for those that are, I better just get to it. So what's the point? A couple of things I thought are useful about telling a kind of story about the everyday like this. The presentation aims to provide some stories that open alternatives to the narrow and often negative depictions of Palestine and Palestinians in the news media. And I think for Palestinians, for people that know about Palestine, this isn't so new. This is your everyday life too, right? But for people in my family or in social circles, it is useful, I think, to get out these alternative stories. People that are like getting their news about Palestine from Fox News or from CNN. Like, I think it is important to talk about some kind of everyday stuff to kind of open up the stories of Palestinians. There's a bit more to it, though. I talked today about renting out a room, growing a garden, raising figs, raising chickens, raising kids, not the same thing, but sending kids to school, working for NGOs, working for businesses, cutting hair, all this kind of stuff, getting together as a family. And these stories are pretty unlikely to be taken into account, right, in the news media. Like, this isn't what a terrorist is made of, or what a, you know. It also, a story like this doesn't come in when we tell revolutionary stories either. These are stories about getting by, right? These are stories about coping. And these are the activities that keep, and it's important, I think, to talk about these, because these are stories, these are activities that keep people and families and communities alive, and in some way maintain connections to the land. And I'm not just talking about like habanero peppers. I mean, you know, you pay the cost of the land, you maintain that place on the land. And these everyday kind of coping ways of living are the way that Palestinians stay in Palestine, maintain their position. That's one of the ways. And also that coping and getting by are the way that people are making it in order to, like, that's the basis of resistance, right? That's the heroic stuff has to be sort of grounded and planted somewhere, and that planting is in, you know, getting by and making it. And I think another interesting thing is, if you think about those different activities that I talked about, those are mostly the work of women. Not all of it, but a lot of it is the work of women. And so when you talk about the everyday, you make the work of women in maintaining, in getting by, and in coping, and in sort of making sense of things day to day, become suddenly more visible. And so that, again, is another kind of benefit of talking about the everyday. I'll make one last really small point, which is that if you kind of listen close, and probably a lot of you know a lot about the context of the stories that I'm telling, you know, like, that the occupation touches on a lot of these things, right? The speaking Spanish, the particular, and anyway, I won't go through it, but the occupation touches these kind of everyday things. But at the same time, I feel like the occupation is not the center of it. Like, these are stories these are an encounter, right, about Palestinian life that doesn't have Israel at the center, that doesn't have the conflict at the center. It's still important, right? That violence, those struggles, the occupation, but it's not at the center of those stories. And I think, you know, it's important, and it's even heartening at a time when it's hard to find things to be heartening about, to recognize this, that Palestine is there, that Palestinians are there, getting by. And so that's another thing, another part, or another aspect where I think it's important to remember the everyday. And the last thing I want to say is that these ideas come from me, but they come very strongly from a book called After the Last Sky, beautiful book by Edward Said, and also by work from a friend and colleague, Chris Harper, another geographer. So.